The HOA president actually went as far as calling the sheriff on me because I was swimming in my own backyard lake. A lake I'd personally owned for 15 years, long before her subdivision was ever built. Just imagine it. I'm out there, floating calmly on the water at sunset, listening to the loons echo across the lake, when suddenly the peaceful evening is shredded by police sirens cutting through the cricket song like a chainsaw through silk. Deputy Martinez rolls up my gravel driveway, looking every bit as bewildered as I was. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I have to give you a citation." "HOA complaint," he says, struggling not to laugh. And there, right behind him, stood Karen Whitmore Arms. Folded, fake smile plastered on her face, those icy blue eyes as cold as January. The ticket? A $1,000 fine for unauthorized recreational water use in a restricted area. I'm dripping wet, staring at the paper in disbelief. "Mom, this is my lake. I built this dock myself back when you were still living in California. So tell me, what would you do if somebody tried to dictate how you use your own property?" Drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm willing to bet plenty of you have your own HOA nightmares. What Karen didn't know was that I'd spent 2 decades as a municipal finance director. Big mistake on her part. But let me back up and explain how this all unfolded. My name's Garrett, and 3 years ago, I lost my wife, Sarah, to cancer. We'd been married 22 years, and when she passed, it felt like half my soul had been ripped away. The grief was crushing like you can't breathe, can't think, can't picture a tomorrow without them. So I did what any broken-hearted widower might do. I left everything behind and moved into seclusion. Well, not total seclusion. I inherited my grandfather's 4-acre property in rural North Carolina, complete with a natural spring-fed lake that had been in our family since 1952. Pop had built the original cabin by hand after returning from Korea, and that lake had been his refuge, just like it was about to become mine. Picture it, glass-clear water bubbling up from underground springs, ringed by towering pines that smell like Christmas morning. At daybreak, the loons would call while fog drifted across the surface like ghosts dancing on the water. I'd sit on the dock Pop built, sipping coffee from Sarah's favorite chipped mug, watching trout break the surface for insects. The stillness was healing. No traffic, no deadlines, just wind in the trees and the occasional splash of a fish. Before retiring, I'd spent 20 years as the finance director for Millbrook County, tracking budgets and catching shady contractors who tried to sneak padded invoices past the city. That's when I learned the dirty secret. Most harassment from local authorities comes from obscure, outdated ordinances nobody bothers to question. A lesson that would turn out to be priceless when dealing with petty tyrants like Karen. After Sarah died, I retired early, and that lake became my sanctuary, my therapy, my reason to get up in the morning. Then along came Karen Whitmore. Like a storm in high heels demanding to see nature's manager. In 2019, a developer bought up the old logging road along my north fence. Next thing I knew, bulldozers were tearing down century-old oaks, and my peaceful mornings were drowned out by chainsaws. The smell of diesel and sawdust drifted across my land, smothering the scent of pine until it felt like a hardware store had blown up in the forest. Within 2 years, 47 oversized luxury homes sprouted up lakeside estates. They called it even though the only real lake view was of my property. Nothing screams luxury like paying $800,000 to stare into someone else's backyard, right? That's when Karen arrived, fresh from California, rolling in with a white BMW, vanity plate, Realtor One, and an ego big enough to cast shade over half the county. She had the whole look highlighted hair that probably cost more than my grocery bill, a designer bag worth more than my truck, and that fake, never reaches the eyes grin that just screams, I live for HOA rules. Within 6 months, she'd finagled her way into HOA president and launched her crusade to civilize us country folk. It started small, with those passive-aggressive, neighborly visits. She'd totter across my gravel driveway in stilettos. Let me tell you, stilettos on gravel sound like a tap dancer having a seizure-bearing store-bought cookies while commenting on how my rustic cabin had so much character. The thick perfume cloud she carried clashed with the crisp pine air, like an air freshener in a funeral home. When I turned down her lowball offer to buy my land for 60 cents on the dollar, the mask slipped. That smile turned sharp, and beneath it was a predator. That's when the harassment began. First, complaints to the county about my supposedly unpermitted dock, until I showed them my permits from 2008, older than half her subdivision. Then, she claimed my trout were polluting the watershed, until the environmental inspector laughed and said my lake water was cleaner than most city supplies. But Karen wasn't done. She dug deep and unearthed some archaic ordinance from the 1920s about recreational water permits, a dusty relic that should have died in a law book decades ago. Back in my finance days, I'd seen how these forgotten rules could be twisted into weapons against landowners who didn't know better. She leaned on her old real estate buddies on the county commission and got them to amend it retroactively. Now, suddenly, any lake activity within 500 feet of a housing development required HOA approval. My lake around since the 1950s was somehow under Karen's jurisdiction. A woman who'd been in town for all of 18 months was trying to dictate how my family's water could be used. And that's when she crossed the line. She called the cops on a grieving widower just trying to find peace in his backyard. Big mistake, Karen. Huge mistake. 2 weeks after that swimming citation, she showed up again, this time with backup. I was on the porch, coffee in hand, when I heard multiple vehicles crunching up the driveway. The morning air, scented with pine, was suddenly polluted with that familiar stench of cheap cologne and polyester, the smell of small-time grifters. Karen stepped out of her BMW with a victorious smirk, followed by some guy squeezed into a county inspector uniform that looked 2 sizes too big.
His name tag read Randy Morrison, and he clutched a clipboard as if it were Excalibur, casting himself as some self-appointed king of trivial harassment. "Mr. Henderson," Karen cooed in syrupy tones that didn't fool anyone. "We've had an anonymous report about your commercial fishing business." I almost spit out my coffee. "Commercial fishing? Lady, I stock this lake for fun." Randy puffed up like a rooster, thumping his clipboard against his leg, a nervous tick that might have been amusing if he wasn't trying to squeeze me. "Sir, you'll need to present your business license for this aquaculture facility," he declared, "or I'll have to issue daily fines of $500 until you're in compliance." I'd spent too many years wrangling crooked inspectors back in my municipal days to miss the signs of a scam. Randy had the same greasy vibe as a used car salesman pushing a Honda with no engine. Still, I played it cool, handing over my property deed and fishing permits. "These are personal use," I explained evenly. "I drop about 50 trout in here twice a year, just for me." Randy barely skimmed the documents. "Anonymous complaint says otherwise. Until you prove you're not running a business, this lake is closed." That night, while Karen was probably sipping wine worth more than a month's car payment, I dug out my old laptop. 2 decades in municipal government had taught me one thing: every bureaucrat leaves a trail. Randy Morrison's was about to be traced under a magnifying glass. First find, his inspector's license had expired 2 years ago. The guy threatening me with fines wasn't legally qualified to inspect a lemonade stand, much less my property. I recalled a case from my county days involving a fake inspector pulling a similar stunt. The trick was documenting everything before they knew they'd been caught. I screenshotted his lapsed credentials, filed a complaint with the state licensing board, and kept digging. Public records showed Randy had been inspecting across 3 counties with that expired license. This wasn't bumbling, this was organized fraud. When the board finally confronted him, he apparently lost it. Word spread fast in a small county. He'd called Karen, begging her to clean up his mess. And Karen, ever the strategist, chose offense as her defense. 3 days later, I got an official-looking bill in the mail. The Lakeside Luxury Estates HOA was charging me a $500 monthly liability insurance surcharge for dangerous water activities. They backdated it to January. It was July. Supposedly, I owed $3,000. I had to admire the nerve. She was basically charging me rent to swim in the very lake my grandfather had dug with a borrowed bulldozer back in 1952. Meanwhile, Randy was staring down a $10,000 fine and possible criminal charges for impersonating an inspector. As for me, I buried myself in property law precedents. Years earlier, I'd studied a key Supreme Court ruling, Lucas versus South Carolina. Bureaucrats had tried banning all development on a man's coastal property. The court struck it down, saying government can't strip all economic use of land without compensation. The takeaway was clear: they couldn't demand fees for lawful use of my own property. Armed with that case, I filed for a preliminary injunction to block Karen's stunt. But I didn't stop there. Something told me to hire a surveyor. Call it instinct from years of dealing with schemers. The results? Like Christmas morning wrapped in fireworks. Turns out, Karen's beloved subdivision crept 15 feet into state forest land. 3 houses, including her cousin Danny's prized McMansion, were literally squatting on public property. I tipped off the state forestry department, anonymously, of course. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply playing by the rules and letting your enemies strangle themselves with their own rope. Within a week, 3 HOA homes got slapped with notices for illegal land use. The fines? Up to $50,000 per house, plus removal costs. Suddenly, Karen's $3,000 shakedown looked laughable. The next morning, Karen stormed onto my land like Sherman marching through Georgia, though Sherman probably had better manners. Her face was crimson, her voice loud enough to scatter loons from the lake and wake corpses in the next county. "You think you're clever?" she screeched, stabbing the air with a manicured finger. "I'll sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress." I handed her the freshly printed court documents for my injunction hearing, the paper still warm in my hand. "See you in court, Karen. Bring your checkbook, and maybe a competent lawyer. You'll need both." Her jaw opened and shut like one of my trout pulled out of water, gasping silently. The click of her heels retreating across the gravel sounded sweeter to me than any bird call echoing off the lake. Apparently, Karen hadn't learned her lesson from the whole Randy fiasco, because 2 weeks later she decided to escalate things into psychological warfare. By that, I mean she called Channel 7 News. I was feeding the trout their breakfast at the time. Yes, I had them on a schedule, and no, I don't want judgment, when I heard the unmistakable growl of a news van crawling up my drive. The way the tires crushed the gravel was oddly distinct, like someone stomping on bubble wrap made of stone. Out stepped reporter Megan Torres, walking with the deliberate stride all-season reporters seem to practice, followed by a cameraman who looked like he'd rather be filming anything else. And then, of course, Karen emerged from her BMW. She was wearing what could only be described as her concerned citizen costume, navy blazer, light makeup, and a somber expression that suggested she was deeply, tragically worried about plummeting property values. "Mr. Henderson," Megan called, approaching me. "We're here about reports that your activities on the lake may be putting the community's water supply at risk." Behind her, Karen strategically positioned herself in the shot, flanked by 3 neighbors she'd clearly recruited to serve as background props. Their faces displayed the same artificial concern you see in prescription drug commercials, right before the narrator starts rattling off the horrifying side effects. "Ma'am," I said, putting down the fish food, "I'm not sure what concerns you're referring to." That's when the rapid-fire questions began. Was I aware of the potential environmental hazards? Did I care about children's safety? What about the property values? Karen had clearly fed Megan a list of loaded questions meant to paint me as some kind of ecological villain. But here's the thing about sitting through 20 years of city council meetings, you learn how to stay calm when people try to make you look bad on camera. So I invited them to test the lake water right then and there. The look on Karen's face when I scooped a glassful straight from the lake, held it to the camera, and drank it without flinching, that was priceless. Like watching someone realize they'd shown up to a tank battle armed with a squirt gun. This water has been tested by County Environmental Services 3 times this past year, I explained evenly, pulling out a folder so thick it could double as a doorstop. It's cleaner than most city water supplies. Would you like to see the reports? I handed Megan a neat stack, official inspection reports showing pristine quality, property deeds tracing my water rights back to 1892, up-to-date county permits, and photographs documenting Karen's subdivision creeping onto state land. You could practically see the narrative unraveling in real time. Megan's questions grew sharper, suddenly directed at why Karen's claims didn't line up with the evidence. Karen, meanwhile, started sweating despite the crisp October air, scented with burning leaves from somewhere down the valley. Mrs. Whitmore, Megan turned the camera on her, do you have any proof of water contamination? Karen's response was a circus act of half-formed excuses, vague mentions of potential risks, and nebulous community concerns. Her left eye twitched, the same tell I'd seen countless times from shady contractors trying to bluff their way through budget hearings. That's when I decided to share what I'd dug up about her history. Years of auditing municipal contracts had given me connections in multiple states, and a few calls had confirmed that Karen wasn't exactly a first-timer when it came to wrecking neighborhoods. Megan, I said, you may want to look into Mrs. Whitmore's past communities in California and Arizona. Interesting patterns emerge when you follow the paperwork. Karen blanched beneath her foundation. She knew I had receipts. The interview ended with Karen demanding equal time to share the HOA perspective. Megan agreed to a follow-up, which turned out to be Karen's next big mistake. While I spent the week gathering more documentation, Karen burned her time calling in favors. Unfortunately for her, the station manager happened to be Jim Patterson, a man I'd once worked alongside on municipal transparency projects. Small world, especially when you've built a reputation for rooting out financial fraud. The second segment aired that Thursday. Megan presented a balanced report showing both sides, but Karen's performance was comedy gold. She contradicted herself, snapped defensively at basic questions, and even admitted she'd never tested the subdivision's well water she claimed to be defending. Meanwhile, I calmly laid out facts, paperwork in hand. The visual contrast was striking, Karen looking unhinged while I sat there like some sort of bureaucratic Batman armed with binders instead of gadgets. The community's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. My voicemail filled with messages of thanks from neighbors who admitted they'd been too scared to speak out before, worried about Karen retaliating with HOA violations. But humiliation only made Karen more dangerous. Stung by the coverage and whispers about her past, she went nuclear. The following Monday, the county health department showed up. Karen had filed a complaint claiming my septic system was leaking into the lake, contaminating the water, and endangering public health. She demanded a full stop to all lake activities until an investigation was completed. The inspector, Marcus, arrived with proper credentials and professionalism. I welcomed him in, offered coffee, and let him inspect everything. When he saw that my cabin actually used a state-of-the-art composting system with zero wastewater entering the lake, his reaction wasn't what Karen had hoped for. This is an eco-friendly showcase, he told me, snapping photos. Mind if I get your contractor's info? I know people who'd love a setup like this. The complaint was formally dismissed as frivolous and malicious, a phrase I knew would come in handy in court later. The victory was sweet, but I knew Karen was just getting started. She was escalating like a rocket, and her next move would be even more reckless. If she'd had any sense, she would have quit after the septic system fiasco. Instead, she doubled down like a gambler holding a pair of twos, convinced it was pocket aces. That Friday, I was out back splitting firewood, letting the steady rhythm of the axe clear my head, when I heard the growl of a delivery truck on the gravel. The driver handed me a certified letter thick enough to choke a mule. The return address made me laugh, Rutherford and Associates, the most expensive law firm in Charlotte. Karen had shelled out for attorneys who billed $600 an hour to draft letters threatening lawsuits over parking disputes. This cease and desist claimed my nuisance water activities violated noise ordinances. According to their inventive interpretation of the law, my swimming created excessive splashing sounds that interfered with neighbors' peaceful enjoyment. They demanded $5,000 in mediation fees to avoid a lawsuit. I almost had to admire the creativity. Karen was literally trying to find me for splashing in my own lake. She had turned pettiness into performance art. But the letter was just her opening act. That weekend, she escalated into full-blown surveillance mode. HOA members crept past my driveway at 5 miles an hour, snapping photos and videos of anything I did. Someone left notes on my truck windshield reminding me to respect community standards and be a good neighbor. By Monday, the county seemed unusually interested in me. Building inspector on Monday, fire marshal Tuesday, tax assessor Wednesday. Each visit triggered by anonymous complaints of potential violations. The stench of bureaucratic bullying lingered in the air, thicker than fog rolling off the lake at sunrise. Back in my municipal days, I'd seen this trick plenty of times. Death by paperwork. The aim wasn't to uncover real violations, it was to grind me down with endless harassment until I finally packed up and left. Karen had clearly studied the manual on how to drive property owners out through legal attrition. But Karen made one fatal mistake. She picked a fight with someone who knew how to dig through public records and follow financial breadcrumbs. That weekend, I locked myself away in the basement of the county records office, a place that reeks of mildew, dust, and broken promises. What I uncovered down there felt better than waking up on Christmas morning. Turns out, Karen's subdivision had been pushed through on an emergency wetlands permit requiring a 25-foot buffer around every natural water source. 3 homes, including Karen's oversized McMansion, sat right inside that buffer. Each violation carried fines of up to $10,000 per day and even the possibility of demolition if the environmental damage was deemed serious enough. And it got even better. Using North Carolina's public records law, I requested the HOA's financial statements, a right any property owner within the HOA's reach could exercise. What I found made Ree's fake inspector badge look trivial. Karen had been bleeding the HOA treasury as if it were a private ATM. State law required competitive bidding for contracts above $10,000. Karen ignored that. Her husband Rick's landscaping company pocketed a $45,000 exclusive contract each year. Pool maintenance went to her cousin Danny at $28,000 annually. The legal fees budget covered payments to her personal attorney for issues completely unrelated to HOA business. Years earlier, I'd worked on a case involving a city official running the same kind of self-dealing scam. The key was proving a consistent pattern and intent to defraud. And Karen had left a paper trail wider than Interstate 85. While I was busy assembling my case, Karen tried to strike first. She filed for a temporary restraining order, accusing me of stalking HOA members and threatening violence during our property dispute. The sheriff served me the papers while I was out feeding trout that evening. The hearing was set for Tuesday morning. I hired Patricia, an attorney who specialized in HOA battles and had a reputation for tearing apart corrupt board members before breakfast. She flipped through my documentation and smiled, the kind of smile that made opposing lawyers wish they'd stayed in bed. "Garrett," she said, spreading the files across her table, "Karen's about to find out why you don't bring a knife to a gunfight." The hearing itself felt like a stage play. Karen showed up with 3 HOA members in their Sunday best, faces rehearsed into masks of concerned citizenry. I walked in carrying a binder so thick it could have served as a boat anchor. Judge Margaret Yates, a veteran with 3 decades of experience handling nuisance lawsuits, examined the evidence like a forensic accountant. Karen's witnesses crumbled under even basic questioning, contradicting each other left and right. My security camera footage made it clear who was actually doing the harassing. When Karen's attorney tried to submit proof of my so-called threats, Patricia calmly produced audio recordings of every single encounter. On tape, Karen's voice spiraled into hysteria while mine stayed measured and professional. Judge Yates tossed out Karen's restraining order request, hit her HOA with a temporary protective order, and told them to stop their surveillance and trespassing. She also awarded me $2,500 in attorney's fees and warned Karen she was skating dangerously close to perjury charges. Karen completely unraveled in the courthouse parking lot, screaming about corruption, shrieking that I was destroying the community. Her meltdown was so loud it could have woken half the county. A local reporter caught the scene, and the next morning's paper ran a front-page story, HOA President's Courtroom Tantrum. That same evening, several residents approached me quietly. They confessed Karen had been tormenting them too. Pool parties shut down for noise, garden ornaments rejected for being architecturally unsuitable, parking fines slapped on guests staying longer than 4 hours. A few were even talking about starting a recall petition. As I enjoyed the small win, Patricia dug deeper and found something that would change everything. Buried in the original HOA charter was a clause I had completely overlooked. Any property owner within 1,000 feet of the subdivision could petition to join the HOA as a voting member. My lake property not only qualified, it was the single largest parcel, giving me control of 30% of all voting shares. While Karen obsessed over harassing me, she never realized I could legally join her kingdom and vote her right off the throne. The irony was exquisite. But Patricia wasn't finished. She kept combing through the old subdivision plats, the kind of dry technical maps most people ignore, and one morning at 6 a.m., she called me, her voice practically buzzing. "Garrett, get down here now. This is the smoking gun." I drove through the morning mist rising off my lake, the scent of wet pine and anticipation thick in the air. When I arrived, Patricia had coffee brewing and documents spread out like clues in a detective's case file. What she revealed was staggering. Karen's entire subdivision stood on a foundation of violations. The county's master plan had designated the land for low-density rural housing, no more than 16 homes across the 95-acre parcel. Karen's 47 McMansions blew past that limit by more than 300%. The developer had skirted the rules using an emergency housing shortage loophole created after Hurricane Florence in 2019 when displaced families needed homes fast. That provision temporarily allowed denser builds. Temporarily. The variance expired after 5 years unless renewed by county commissioners. Karen's subdivision variance was set to lapse on December 15, just 6 months away. If it wasn't renewed, 31 houses would have to be torn down. The financial fallout would be catastrophic. Patricia ran the HOA's financial projections on her laptop. Right now, assessments assume 47 homes paying $320 a month. If only 16 remain, those owners would need to cover the same expenses. She tapped the numbers. That means monthly dues would skyrocket to $940 per house. Most residents had no clue they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. But the biggest blow came from Karen's own correspondence files, which we obtained in discovery. She'd known about the expiration date all along. She'd been secretly lobbying commissioners for renewal. Her campaign against me, though, had backfired spectacularly. During my years in municipal finance, I'd worked closely with several of those commissioners. They remembered me as the guy who followed the rules and caught financial messes before they became scandals. Commissioner Martinez had even referred to me as that nice man with the lake when talking about responsible development. Karen's public tantrum and petty harassment turned former allies into adversaries. Her odds of winning that renewal? Between slim and none, Patricia pulled out the original HOA charter and directed me to a section that instantly made my coffee taste a little sweeter. According to the document, HOA membership applied to every property owner inside the community's borders, plus a 100-foot buffer surrounding the entire subdivision. My land sat 23 feet inside that buffer. That meant I qualified as a legitimate member with voting rights. The charter laid out that voting influence was tied to property size and assessed value. My 4-acre lakefront property was valued at $485,000, while the average subdivision home sat around $225,000. Under those rules, I would hold 31% of the HOA's total voting power. Patricia explained the implications clearly. With that voting block, I could prevent assessment hikes, trigger special elections, demand full access to financial records without fighting through public requests, and even introduce charter amendments. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had spent months trying to dictate what I could do with my property, and now I had the chance to flip the script and dictate terms within her HOA. But staring at those legal papers, I realized something deeper. I didn't want to tear the community apart. Too many people were suffering under Karen's games, just like I had. The real objective wasn't revenge, it was cutting out the root problem and helping the neighborhood heal. My mission shifted: remove Karen, fix the finances, and rebuild the HOA into something that served its members instead of feeding one person's obsession with power. Karen, however, had already gotten wind that information about the zoning expiration was slipping out. She immediately scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday, claiming urgent financial issues needed to be addressed. The short notice was no accident, it was her way of keeping attendance low. That gave me only 72 hours to submit my HOA membership application and rally support from residents who were fed up. Saturday morning was shaping up to be the battle for the community's future. Patricia spent the weekend drafting airtight legal filings while I contacted neighbors who'd approached me after my courthouse win. This wasn't just about control of the HOA, it was about protecting the financial survival of 47 families. Justice was close enough to taste, but it would demand flawless timing and the courage of neighbors who were sick of living under Karen's petty dictatorship. 3 days. That's all I had to build an alliance strong enough to topple her empire. The scent of coffee and determination filled my cabin as Patricia and I mapped out a plan like generals before a major campaign. Our first recruit, Janet Morrison, a retired teacher from Maple Court who had been quietly gathering evidence of Karen's abuses for 2 years. Teachers like her carry a quiet strength, sharpened by years of handling tough parents and tight budgets. Karen had slapped her with a $200 fine for putting up a birdbath that supposedly violated architectural standards. Her crime? Concrete doves. When I called, Janet didn't hesitate. "Mr. Henderson, I've been waiting for someone to finally stand up to that woman. What do you need from me?" She had 2 spiral notebooks crammed with records, every fine, every surprise inspection, every instance of voices being silenced at board meetings. Her files read like a case study in abuse of power. Next was Bob Martinez, an accountant from Oak Ridge Drive who had dared to question HOA finances. Bob was the kind of man who noticed when the numbers didn't line up, a dangerous trait in Karen's world of smoke and mirrors. Over eggs and bacon at the local diner, he laid it out. "I've been trying to get access to invoices for months. Karen says everything's confidential. But I've already found $43,000 in expenses that don't make sense in this year's budget alone." His spreadsheets revealed a pattern of suspicious spending: landscaping jobs billed far higher than the work performed, equipment purchases with no delivery records, and legal fees covering matters unrelated to the HOA. Our third ally was Lisa Park, a civil engineer who had originally designed the subdivision's drainage system until Karen altered the plans without permits. Lisa was practical and sharp, the kind of professional who built solutions that had to work in the real world. Karen cut corners on my drainage design to save money, Lisa told us at my cabin. "Now runoff flows straight toward your lake. If the state finds out, they could shut down the subdivision." Her expertise gave us the technical credibility to counter Karen's emotional manipulation. By Friday night, our war council met at my kitchen table. Patricia had assembled 3 meticulously organized binders of evidence. The strategy was precise: reveal Karen's financial misconduct, expose the zoning time bomb, and present my membership application as the fix for both. Bob would present the numbers in plain language: $45,000 billed to Rick's Landscaping for work worth $18,000. $28,000 in pool maintenance paid out despite service being weekly instead of daily. Legal fees that included Karen's personal divorce lawyer, covered with HOA funds. Janet would share resident stories, giving the data a human face. Lisa would lay out the infrastructure violations that Karen had been hiding. I knew from my municipal days that stories carried more weight than raw statistics. People needed to see Karen not as a mistake but as the deliberate source of their problems. Patricia reviewed the legal framework. North Carolina law allowed any HOA member to call for emergency elections if there was proof of financial mismanagement. My membership gave me the authority to do just that, and my 31% vote guaranteed Karen's allies couldn't block it. We even had backup strategies if she tried to cut the meeting short, silence me, or call the police. Everything was buttoned up. Saturday dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October morning that makes anything feel possible. We gathered at my cabin at 7 a.m., 3 hours before the meeting. The smell of bacon and coffee mixed with adrenaline as we went through final preparations. Janet's nerves showed, but her resolve was firm. Somebody has to stop her before she ruins this place completely. Bob was energized. Numbers don't lie. And hers have been lying for 3 years. Lisa rolled out her maps and diagrams. When they see how much money she's wasted, they'll understand why their fees keep going up. For the first time in months, I felt calm. After years of defending myself against Karen's endless attacks, we were finally going on offense, with truth, evidence, and the law on our side. At 9:30, we loaded everything into Bob's van and drove to the community center. Anticipation tasted like victory. Karen's rule of petty tyranny was about to collapse under the weight of hard facts and legal authority. The only unknown was whether she would surrender quietly or drag the neighborhood down with her in a blaze of ego. The week before the showdown, Karen had gone completely unhinged. Like a cornered predator with a law degree and a Facebook account, she launched a scorched earth campaign against us. Friday night, Janet got a threatening text, spreading lies about HOA business as grounds for a defamation lawsuit. Sent at 11:47 p.m., the hour of insomnia and desperation. Monday morning, she called Bob's firm, accusing him of misusing company resources to harass volunteers. And her grand finale? A complaint to the State Engineering Board, accusing Lisa of misconduct simply because Lisa had dared to expose her unapproved drainage changes. 3 women, who had merely asked questions about their neighborhood, suddenly found themselves targeted by an HOA president, who seemed completely detached from reality. But Karen wasn't finished yet. She filed another police report, this time accusing me of making violent threats during our boundary dispute. Conveniently, she overlooked the fact that our entire exchange had been caught on my security cameras. The responding officer happened to be Deputy Martinez, the same one who'd written me up for swimming earlier. And his report highlighted Karen's increasingly erratic behavior and her inability to provide any real proof. By Saturday morning, Karen delivered her masterpiece of absurdity. I showed up early at the community center, only to see a handwritten sign taped to the entrance. Meeting relocated to 847 Maple Court due to security concerns. Karen's garage. She had shifted an HOA meeting for 47 households into her 2-car garage, a space that could barely squeeze in 15 people, unless half of them were malnourished teenagers. The air reeked of motor oil and desperation. Patricia immediately challenged the setup, citing HOA bylaws that required enough space for all members to attend. Karen shot back that security threats meant attendance had to be restricted. Apparently, open governance was now considered a safety hazard, as residents began arriving and found themselves crowded into Karen's driveway, struggling to hear anything at all. The murmurs of discontent grew louder. Nothing reveals petty tyranny quite like forcing neighbors to stand outside in October weather, just because you're terrified of democracy. You don't even live here, Karen shrieked when I presented my membership application. You can't tell us what to do. The look on her face when Patricia calmly explained that under the original charter, I had every legal right to join was priceless. Like watching someone realize they had just stepped on a landmine. Her inner circle, husband Rick and cousin Danny included, suddenly understood what that meant. My 31% voting share could render their little power clique irrelevant. That's when Karen's meltdown hit full throttle. She started screaming about illegal interference, claiming I'd forged documents, bribed county officials, and launched into paranoid accusations about a massive conspiracy involving the county commissioners, the state forestry department, and probably the Illuminati. Even her own supporters backed away, uneasy with her unhinged ranting. When your HOA president begins sounding like a conspiracy crank on a street corner, loyalty evaporates fast. Patricia stepped in, citing HOA Bylaw Article 12, Emergency Procedures, which required a vote to relocate the meeting when the space wasn't adequate. From my time in municipal government, I'd seen the tactic before. Leaders trying to choke off public input. The fix was always the same: force a vote and let democracy decide. With 23 residents present, the result was clear: 18 yes, 5 no. The meeting would move back to the community center. Karen refused to acknowledge the outcome, insisting only board members had authority. Patricia countered with state law, proving that members could override the board when constitutional rights were at stake. That's when Karen called the police. Deputy Martinez showed up, looking like a man who'd rather be chasing real criminals. When Karen demanded arrests for illegal assembly, he calmly explained it was a civil matter and suggested they act like adults. Advice Karen promptly ignored. The residents moved to the community center anyway, a public space where her suppression tactics held no power. 31 people showed up, the largest turnout in the subdivision's history. The energy was electric, like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Karen arrived 20 minutes late, attorney on speakerphone, insisting the meeting was invalid due to the location change. But residents were fed up. They hadn't come to watch a procedural circus. They wanted answers about finances and governance. I sat patiently, taking notes, while Karen dug herself deeper with every objection. Then the real questions began. Residents pressed her about landscaping costs, pool maintenance, legal fees. Her answers grew evasive, inconsistent, desperate. When Bob Martinez asked about a $45,000 landscaping contract, Karen declared it was proprietary information. Bob promptly produced public records, showing massive overbilling. Rick Whitmore began sweating in the corner, like a man watching his Grady train derail. Cornered, Karen lashed out. She turned her attack on me, dragging up Sarah's death and implying I was unstable, a danger to families and property values. The room went silent. Even her allies recoiled at her willingness to weaponize a widower's grief. Janet Morrison stood up, voice trembling with fury. Karen, you fined me $200 for a bird bath. When did we become so cruel to our neighbors? That broke the dam. Residents began sharing their own stories of harassment and intimidation. Years of pent-up frustration spilled out like water through a broken levee. Karen tried to adjourn the meeting, but nobody budged. The taste of democracy was too sweet. After years of authoritarian rule, I approached the podium with my binders. Karen made one final stand. I won't let you destroy our community, she shouted. I'm not destroying it, I answered evenly. I'm trying to save it. The stage was set. In the week between the garage fiasco and the final showdown, Karen went nuclear. Burn it all down desperation. The kind Napoleon himself would have admired. On the retreat from Moscow, she hired a shady ex-cop named Wade, a so-called private investigator, who drove a beat-up sedan and smelled like regret mixed with cigarettes. He tailed me around town, snapped photos through my cabin windows, and even questioned my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, about my mental state and daily habits. Meanwhile, Karen's social media campaign deteriorated into pure fiction. She created fake accounts, spreading rumors that I planned to open a commercial fishing operation that would wreck property values. She posted doctored screenshots of threats, allegedly from me, complete with intentional spelling errors, to make them seem authentic. Her lowest blow came next, claiming Sarah hadn't died of cancer, but had taken her own life, and that I was covering it up. Even for Karen, this was a new depth of cruelty. But while she shredded what little credibility remained, I was assembling the final evidence that would bring her down for good. Bob Martinez uncovered the smoking gun. Bank records showing Karen had siphoned $85,000 from the HOA reserve fund to put down on a Myrtle Beach vacation condo. The transaction was disguised as emergency roof repairs for the community center. The very same day, Karen closed on Beach Breeze Condos, Unit 247. That weekend, she was posting beach selfies, while homeowners assumed their reserves were funding infrastructure. It was audacious theft, like robbing a bank, and then bragging about it on Instagram. Meanwhile, Patricia had been working with the county prosecutor. Each fraudulent transaction carried a potential 2 to 10-year prison sentence under state law. Karen wasn't just facing removal. She was staring down serious prison time. As for Wade, he overplayed his hand. On Tuesday night, Mrs. Patterson, caught him trespassing on her property, trying to peer through her windows. Deputies arrested him for intimidation and illegal surveillance. He immediately flipped, naming Karen as the one who hired him to dig up dirt on me. Now her intimidation campaign was officially part of the criminal record. By Thursday, the last piece fell into place. My own investigator, an actual professional, not a chain-smoking burnout, delivered a full report on Karen's past. She had run the same scam in 3 other states, California, Arizona, Florida. The pattern never changed. Move in, take over the HOA, embezzle money, sow chaos, then vanish before charges stuck. 2 criminal cases were still pending. From her earlier communities, there was still a civil judgment of $127,000 hanging over her head, money she had never paid. Karen wasn't just a petty bully tormenting the neighborhood, she was a seasoned predator with a history of wrecking communities and committing financial fraud. On the morning of our final showdown, I spotted a U-Haul trailer hitched to the back of Karen's BMW. It was clear she intended to bolt right after the meeting, likely with whatever cash she could grab before law enforcement caught up. That evening, the community center was packed to overflowing. 67 residents turned out, more than had ever attended any neighborhood gathering before. Megan Torres from Channel 7 had quietly set up in the back with her news crew, tipped off about the ongoing HOA investigation. County Prosecutor Williams sat alongside Detective Hayes, both waiting for Karen to incriminate herself on camera so they could move in with the arrest warrant. Outside, Deputy Martinez kept watch, fully aware of Karen's explosive tendencies when cornered. Karen swept in dripping with freshly purchased jewelry, almost certainly bought with HOA money. She wore the smug bravado of a pyramid scheme ringleader moments before collapse. Rick, her husband, was nowhere to be seen. Word was, he'd already fled to Oklahoma with their remaining assets. From the very start, she tried to seize control, insisting on a shortened agenda under the excuse of security concerns. But when I stood and claimed recognition under Robert's Rules of Order, Patricia rose beside me holding our finalized membership paperwork. The review period ended yesterday, Patricia declared. Mr. Henderson is now a full HOA member, holding 31% of the vote. The color drained from Karen's face. In an instant, the balance of power had shifted permanently. The room stirred with energy as neighbors realized Karen's stranglehold on their future had snapped. I carried 3 thick binders to the podium, my voice steady from 2 decades of running city meetings. I'd like to bring some financial discrepancies to the board's attention. Karen shot to her feet, screeching, "You can't reveal confidential HOA matters." I turned directly to the news camera. "Ma'am, embezzlement isn't confidential. It's criminal. Justice was finally within reach. All I had to do was lay out the evidence and let the truth bury her. The only unknown was whether she'd go down quietly or in one last fit of narcissistic chaos. Given her history, I knew which way to bet. The moment of reckoning hit like a freight train loaded with proof. 67 residents filled the center, the air buzzing with nervous anticipation and the faint smell of coffee. Channel 7's lights cast the room in sharp relief, making the scene feel more like a courtroom than a community meeting. Karen sat at the front, her new jewelry gleaming like armor, but her trembling hands betrayed her as she shuffled a stack of fake legal documents. The U-Haul visible through the window told the truth about her confidence level. "I'd like to present some financial irregularities for board review," I announced, my tone carrying the weight of long experience in exposing public corruption. "You can't discuss confidential HOA business," she shrieked, her voice so shrill it could have rattled windows across the county. Again, I faced the cameras and smiled. "Ma'am, embezzlement isn't confidential. It's a crime." That's when Bob Martinez took over, standing at the projector with the calm precision of an accountant slicing through fog. The first slide showed Karen's husband's landscaping company. Billed, $67,000. Actual work, $23,000. "This demonstrates a clear pattern of inflated billing," Bob explained. "Pool maintenance charged for daily visits, when in fact, only weekly service occurred. Legal fees funneled into Karen's personal divorce attorney." Karen lunged at Bob's laptop, snarling like a wild animal, screaming that everything was fabricated. But her meltdown only underscored her guilt as slide after slide revealed transfers from HOA accounts into her personal bank. Gasps echoed when the screen displayed the $85,000 supposedly spent on roof repairs, the very same day Karen closed on her beachfront condo. That weekend, her social media showed her celebrating at the shore while residents believed their dues were fixing community infrastructure. Then I advanced to the final portion of my investigator's report. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Karen Whitmore Johnson, serial community destroyer." The room erupted in shocked whispers as her true identity was revealed: 3 other neighborhoods ruined with the same scam, pending fraud charges in California, an unpaid civil judgment in Arizona for $89,000. Karen unraveled. She screamed about conspiracies, accused me of threatening children, even waved a forged psychiatric evaluation with a fake license number so obviously phony that neighbors laughed outright. That was when Prosecutor Williams rose, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Prosecutor Williams. You are charged with embezzling $127,000 from your neighbors." The news crew surged forward as Karen realized she'd just perjured herself and fabricated accusations on live TV. Her face cycled through colors like a mood ring. "This is illegal surveillance," she shrieked, lunging at the cameras. Her designer heels slipped on the polished floor, sending her stumbling in a near-comic display. Detective Hayes closed in with cuffs, reciting her Miranda rights while she ranted about conspiracies. The charges were read for all to hear: embezzlement, fraud, false reports, intimidation of witnesses. The evidence was airtight. As Karen was dragged out screaming threats, the community center fell silent. Officers searched the U-Haul and uncovered stolen HOA property, commercial-grade equipment worth thousands. When the police left, I turned to the stunned residents. "I never wanted to tear this community apart," I said softly. "I wanted to save it." Slowly, Janet Morrison began clapping. Applause spread until the room erupted in cheers and tears. Years of frustration poured out. We held an emergency vote on the spot, stripping Karen of every position, her proxy votes nullified. Bob became treasurer, Janet secretary, Lisa Park president. When asked if I wanted a seat, I declined with a smile. "I'll serve as an advisor. My lake's always open for fishing, and it's time we started being neighbors again." For the first time in 3 years, people lingered, talking like friends instead of enemies. The victory was sweet, but sweeter still was watching the community finally breathe free. Karen's petty reign was over, toppled not by anger, but by receipts, documents, and a U-Haul full of evidence. Justice had been served, backed by law, transparency, and solidarity. 6 months later, I sat on my dock watching kids learn to fish while parents chatted instead of feuding over property values. Smoke from grilling burgers drifted over the lake during our first annual festival, laughter echoing across the water, a sound our neighborhood hadn't heard in years. Karen ended up pleading guilty, earning 4 years in state prison. Her beach condo was seized to help recover funds. Rick was hauled back from Oklahoma, serving 18 months for conspiracy. Fake Inspector Randy got probation and a lifetime ban from government work. The new board launched what we called the Transparency Revolution, monthly financial records posted online, competitive bidding required over $1,000, quarterly open town halls instead of Karen's secret sessions. Her oppressive rules were repealed, replaced with real neighborly guidelines. The looming zoning crisis was solved with cooperation and county planning, securing permanent grandfather status and moving 15 houses at developer expense. My lake became the heart of the neighborhood, Sarah's Sanctuary, named for my late wife. Kids learned to fish there, families shared canoes, and quiet swims helped heal souls, mine included. The dock was expanded to hold the whole community, the sound of children laughing carrying across the water the way Sarah would have loved. The story spread far beyond us. Megan's coverage won a regional Emmy, the piece going viral under the headline, "How One Man Saved His Community from an HOA Tyrant." I was later called to testify before the state legislature, helping craft Karen's law, which now requires annual independent audits and full financial transparency for HOAs. 3 other neighborhoods asked for my help, and I found a purpose I hadn't expected, using my 2 decades in municipal finance to free communities from petty despots. Financially, we bounced back stronger than ever. Between seized assets, insurance, and recovered property, we ended up wealthier than before. HOA dues dropped to $180 a month, lower than when Karen took charge. Reserves hit record highs. Property values jumped 12% once she was gone, proving that good governance and genuine community spirit are worth more than iron-fisted control. For me, the lake that once kept me afloat after Sarah's death became a living symbol of resilience and renewal. My grief will always remain, but channeling it into rebuilding a neighborhood gave it meaning. Just last week, I got a call from Tennessee. Another HOA president was blocking a disabled veteran from adding wheelchair ramps. The man's voice shook with anger and hope. "I heard what you did in North Carolina. Please, my HOA is fining me for trying to make my home accessible." I looked across the lake at Janet teaching her granddaughter to fish while Bob flipped burgers at our monthly cookout. Neighbors laughed together under the fading sun. "Tell me everything," I said, grabbing my notebook. "Let's see what we can do. Because here's what this entire ordeal taught me: petty tyrants only win when good people keep quiet. But when neighbors unite, armed with documentation, legal know-how, and courage, justice doesn't just happen. It's unstoppable. The best revenge against corruption isn't more corruption. It's building something better together." If you've lived through your own HOA nightmare, share it in the comments. I read them all, and believe me, Karen wasn't the worst I've heard. And if this story inspired you to stand up to your own bullies, hit subscribe. More stories of neighborhood justice are on the way. Next week, an HOA president who tried to steal a veteran service dog. You won't believe how that one ends. Sometimes, the good guys do win, especially when they've got receipts, solid legal backing, and the unshakable belief that neighbors deserve better. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got trout to feed, and a community to enjoy. Backhand index pointing right. Share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe. More wild neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner.